Hi everyone, it's Lisa Sweeney here from Business in Heels. Welcome to our interviews on Gender Equity Insights Live. I'm joined today by Krithika Hansen, and we're going to dig in a little bit to the Gender Equity Awards. As many of you know, Business in Heels is the organisation behind the Gender Equity Awards. We've been doing this for some time and we're now into our fifth year. And many people keep saying to us, what's it really take to win? What are some of the winning entries? And of course, there's so many great initiatives that we keep coming across. So we thought we'd get Krithika here today to share with us a little bit of an insight into the win that they had last year. So Krithika Hansen is the former Chief People Officer of Telstra Super and has been a long supporter of the awards, both as a sponsor and as an entrant. Last year, they were the recipient of the Best Medium Company Award. So welcome, Krithika.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let me ask you, first of all, a little bit of insight into your win. One of the key things about the wins is that these are initiatives that are more than just a policy. They are things that constantly change and are actually experienced by the employees. So tell us a little bit about the initiatives that Telstra Super put in place.
Yes, sure. So when I first joined Telstra Super, the fund was quite progressive in its thinking around diversity and inclusion more broadly. And in fact, when I first walked into the fund, it was, I have to say, it was probably one of the most diverse places I've ever worked at in my career, and so welcoming, and really open to trying different things. And so we had the foundations, just like many organizations have, where you've got your parental leave, and we paid super on parental leave, being a super fund. We had the additional personal leave that people could use for if they were pregnant or trying to get pregnant. There was leave that people could access. So we had some really good foundations that was already in place when I first came into the fund.
Mm-hmm. And then what did you do to continue to
Uh,
improve this?
Yeah, so we one of the first things we did actually, um, coming in there, I'm very big on looking at data. I'm very big on understanding the demographic of a workplace, because whatever you do has got to make sense for the employees, and um, ideally be used by a reasonable percentage of people, so that you can understand the value of what you're offering. So when I looked at the data and I understood the demographics, the average age at Telstra Super was a little bit older than some of my previous organizations I'd worked at. So the average age was, in the early 40s. And, and that sort of gave us some good insight around, um, you know, what might what might be useful for people who are
Mm,
working there. And so one of the first things we did was we introduced grandparents' leave, because again, when you looked at the spread of
mm,
the demographics, and you looked at who's there, we thought, well, we've got a really solid parental leave, and we've got good numbers of people using it, and coming back to work. So it served the policy served the way, and it worked the way it was intending to work. But this was
mm.
an opportunity to look at another part of the business, another part of the employee demographic, to say, well, how might we support more broadly? And so that's where we brought in grandparents' leave. And and it was received really well, and we the way we talked about it was, you're there to support your child, when they're going through a pretty momentous period of their life. And so and an employee could use it in whatever way was going to be useful to their families. So you could take the whole time, and we had 3 days of grandparents leave, or you could take a couple of hours because you were trying to cook a meal, or help clean a house, or look after your grandchild. So it just gave the flexibility to be a level of support to the parent, who is also, they might use it at a time when maybe the parent's looking to transition back to work or they're looking for a new job. So it was also a way to say, well, this might enable people to come back into the workplace if they're not at the workplace, because we can offer some support in different ways. So that was one
Yeah.
of the first things we did. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
And then as that was sort of early on. And then, we were looking at being a super fund. Uh, what sorts of things can we do from a broader systemic perspective? And um, some super funds will offer more superannuation for their employees. Um, others might offer some different things. And we were trying to think of how do we have, the members' best interest, that mindset, and also think about how do we impact the broader system,
Mm.
of being part of the super fund industry. And there's lots and lots of data, and it hasn't really stopped, to be honest, about women retiring with less super
Yeah.
when it comes time for retirement, the amount of women being homeless after a particular age. There's
Mm.
just so much news about it. It's research articles. There's just so
Yeah.
much out there. And we thought, well, perhaps the next move, let's think about how do we make a systemic change where we think longer term than the 12 months that a parental leave benefit
Mm.
might give to an individual, because we knew that was in place. We knew the foundations were strong. So how do we now think longer term? And that's when we introduced paying super on a full-time basis when somebody returns part-time. So male or female, doesn't matter. And most people, when they come back from parental leave, and I know not everybody, but a large number of people tend to come back part-time, and that part-time could look like 3 days a week or 4 days a week. So as an employer, you have to pay the super on the days that they're working. So that's already costed for in your budget. But what we were saying is, what would that difference look like? So the extra 1 day of super or or second day of super, what would that look like? And we modeled it on our average salaries in our business. And for us as a business, it was going to cost us, less than $5,000. It was not going to be enormous. And and coupled with the number of people who take parental leave and come back on a part-time basis,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not a big number,
Mm.
but the ripple effect is huge. And so when we modeled it out, using very clever actuaries, and they helped us model this out on what would the impact be when the individual retired, because we did this for 2 years. um, the impact on the individual was $50,000 more, was close to $50,000
Yeah.
more
Wow.
in their superannuation, right? And that's where we were, this is more a legacy that we can leave.
Mm.
This is a greater impact. And also, how do we start to change a system and try and impact what's happening in society? And I appreciate we were a small fund. um, we were able to do it for our people, but we hope that organizations are also, we'll also think systemically as well on how can they impact change longer term, rather than thinking just 12-month blocks or 24-month blocks, because that's where I think the impact really comes in. And interest
Absolutely. So, yeah, go on. So just to highlight this, because I think this is where it's really interesting. You've done your homework. It makes sense financially and all the rest of it for the individual. But what was the outcome?
The interesting outcome that happened for us was, again, if you look at if you look at the average age demographic for the fund, um, we weren't having as many women taking the parental leave. We did have a number, but not as many as the men taking the parental leave. So, in the last 3 years, um, we had more men than women taking parental leave, and they were taking the full, the full 16 weeks that we had offered, plus a number of men chose to come back part-time, because they saw, what that their super wasn't going to be compromised. They understood their salary was compromised, but that was only for a very short period of time. But for the longer term, there wasn't going to be a disadvantage. So just like the women, we wanted to create that equity, across whoever was taking the leave and choosing to come back. So that was incredible, because that was probably the first time I'd been in an organization where we had more men than women taking the leave.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that, what it flashes up is that men are much more aware of super than women are, which is another factor that we know, right?
Yes.
And so if you're part of an industry where it's very female centric and you're actually trying to inspire more men to get and take parental leave and see the benefits of all these great gender equity initiatives, then potentially for you, it's a really important initiative to roll out, because it's saying that no one's disadvantaged by parental leave, which is kind of the point, isn't it?
Exactly. And, I think, and a lot of the men that took it, they were, quite a few were senior in the business, and and the stories that came out, the men were delighted to be having this time with their children when they were really young, and the joy that they took, in doing a school drop off and a school pickup, or, being there for play dates, whatever it was. It was just the joy and the engagement that we got in return, because we were able to do this small thing, but the commitment and the connection to the organization was huge.
Yeah. And yes, of course. And the loyalty, I imagine, going forward. And it's possibly, I'd be interested to hear your opinion, but do you think more people then chose to join you because you had that initiative in place?
It was certainly a unique proposition. And I know when we would talk about it during recruitment and, broader, like, these are all the benefits that we have, this is one of them, people would, it would stop people in their tracks, and they'd go, oh my gosh, I wish this was available when, I was having children, or, that's amazing that an organization's thinking in that way. So, I remember when we launched it, the amount of the responses that we got from employees, and many of them weren't even thinking about children, or they were like, oh, I'm well past that stage, or I'm never going to be affected by it, but I'm proud to work for an organization that is thinking in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, from the point of view of the superannuation gap for you and your people, there would have been no gap ultimately, which is fantastic.
That's what we were aiming for. That's what we were aiming for, or at least reducing that gap was more what we were working to. And it was, appreciate, careers change and things change, but hopefully the compounding of this is going to make a positive impact. And we will never see it. We'll never see it. That's the other thing is, I will never see what that impact is for that person, but that's okay. But hopefully I've made a small difference in their lives later on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for all of you that are considering, entering the Gender Equity Awards, this year we've broken it down a little bit differently. And so it is in industry categories. And so finance, insurance, law, and super are all together. And I think there's some really great initiatives coming through this particular industry. In some cases, it's quite male dominated, but interestingly enough, many of these initiatives that are just good for families are good for everyone, right? The inclusive side of it, So
Definitely.
if you'd had your way, and you were working now another few years in the future, what would you have liked to implement going forward? What was next on your list of things to do?
A couple of quick things we wanted to do. We wanted to increase grandparents' leave. We wanted to to add more days to it, because we were finding it was such a welcome leave for people. And in fact, our CFO took it, our CEO took the leave. When they became grandparents. So we had lots of really wonderful role modeling. I think the piece around super, again, for us, it was really thinking about how could we have done it for a longer period of time. We picked 2 years. Could we have increased that? I think that was definitely a conversation. And then, we were really starting to think about, I guess, more around how do we look at roles, how do we shape roles so that there is that sense of inclusion in the way roles are being done. So, even using AI and using technology to say, how could perhaps roles that have been very specific about you can only do this, this skill set is needed or this capability is needed. How do we actually broaden it out to create more inclusive career pathways for people, whether you're full-time or part-time? So those are some of the ideas we were playing with. But yes, we fortunately we went through a merger and things changed for us.
Yeah, but I think, look, from the point of view of the thought process and the ideas, I'm sure many people are in your situation thinking about it. And it's really interesting that the unintended outcome was that more men took up the part-time side. And I think what we're seeing in many organisations is when truly good gender equity initiatives are done, they are being taken up by everybody. And that's what inclusion's all about, because at the end of it, raising families is now everyone's responsibility, including grandparents. So, in order to make it work in this, complicated world that we're in, and with the cost of living we have, everybody needs to pitch in to a certain extent. And I think, gets more out of life by doing so. So it's lovely to hear organisations that are doing this.
It's it is. It's just, I always say to organizations when people ask me about this, I just say, think longer term than your tenure, because that's actually what's going to create that sustained change. And just understand your data, really understand who your people are and what will be useful, and to think beyond the employee. Because even, I think about some of our other policies that we did. For example, we did a gender transition, people who are going through a gender transition. We knew we didn't have anybody in our organization who was going through that, but we knew that a number of our employees had children who were going through. And that was an impact, right? That's an impact on them as an employee. So how might we think differently and think about beyond the employee? So it was all those things that we had to, we looked beyond. And I would be saying to organizations, just look beyond.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I know when the ASCOT did the paid menstrual and menopause leave, that was something that they were really trying to look beyond, because it was a male CEO and largely mixed leadership group, and they all had this massive learning curve on menopause. In fact, I still today reckon that they know more than my husband. Anyway, it's just one of those things, isn't it? To think, and they normalise behaviour around it, which I think, again, is really valuable for society. So I think your ideas are spot on. And so for anybody thinking about entering, the awards are open until the end of July. So we look forward to seeing what great initiatives you have. If you're wondering about, paying full-time versus full part-timers, clearly Krithika's demonstrated this. It's not expensive and it makes a huge impact. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit about your initiatives and journey you've been on. And I look forward to everybody seeing what you do with the awards this year. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Lisa.